I was halfway through answering my morning emails when a deep, unfamiliar voice boomed across the open plan office. "Lizzie?" I looked up. The man wasn't asking. He was summoning. Daniel Cross, the brand new CEO, stood in the doorway to the main floor, framed in sunlight and arrogance. His tailored suit probably cost more than my car. Conversations around me faltered. A few coworkers glanced between us, eyes wide. "Yes?" I said, standing halfway. He smirked like a predator spotting easy prey. "A word. Now." I followed him into the glass-walled conference room, my heels clicking on the polished floor. He didn't invite me to sit. Instead, he stepped to the head of the table, hands braced on the surface like a general addressing troops. "Let's not waste each other's time," he said, voice carrying just enough for people passing by to hear. "Your role here? Completely redundant. You're a waste of payroll." The words landed with deliberate cruelty. Around us, silhouettes paused just outside the glass, the office's silent audience. I kept my expression neutral, even as my pulse thudded in my ears. "I see. Pack your desk," Daniel continued. "Security will escort you out within the hour." No warning, no discussion, just a public humiliation dressed up as leadership. He expected outrage, anger, begging maybe. But instead, I nodded once. "Understood." He blinked, a fraction thrown. "That's it?" "That's it," I said, my voice even. Because what Daniel Cross didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that 2 days ago I'd signed documents that made me the majority shareholder of this company. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the sweetest victories aren't shouted in the moment. They're served later, slowly when the other person thinks they've already won. The truth was, I'd seen Daniel coming from a mile away. Not literally. I'd never met him before today. But I'd read enough about him in industry papers to know his type. Brash, aggressive, obsessed with power plays. And I'd known the moment the board announced he was replacing Mr. Chandler as CEO that my days here in my current role were numbered. What he couldn't possibly have known was that my role at this company had never been just about my job title. 2 days earlier, I'd sat in my lawyer's office, hands folded on a thick oak desk that smelled faintly of lemon polish and history. Across from me sat Margaret Sloan, a woman who had represented my family's business interests for over 20 years. The documents between us were neatly stacked, each page heavy with embossed seals. "Once you sign here and here," Margaret said, tapping the final page, "the transfer will be complete. You'll hold 62% of the company's voting shares." I stared at her, still slightly dazed. "And you're sure this won't trigger any public filings yet?" "Completely airtight," she replied. "Your uncle structured the sale through a private trust to avoid scrutiny. The board won't know until you choose to inform them." The pen in my hand felt heavier than it should have. With one signature, I'd have more control than anyone else in this building, even the incoming CEO. My uncle's words echoed in my mind. He'd told me years ago, "Patience, Lizzie. There will come a day when you'll need leverage. Don't waste it too soon." I signed. Margaret slid the documents into a locked leather folder. "Congratulations," she said with the faintest of knowing smiles. Now, standing in the middle of the conference room while Daniel Cross announced my termination like a victory speech, I understood exactly what my uncle had meant. I didn't need to fight back now. I just needed to let him dig his own grave. I returned to my desk without a word. My team, well, former team, pretended to work. But I caught the furtive glances, the whispered "what happened?" behind cupped hands. I packed slowly, carefully, choosing only a few personal items. The ceramic mug Emma from accounting had given me last Christmas. The small cactus that had somehow survived my neglect. A framed photo of my parents, taken on the day my father cut the ribbon on the company's first warehouse. Security arrived, awkward and apologetic. As they escorted me to the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass. Calm, collected, and, if I looked closely, just the hint of a smile at the corner of my mouth, because I knew something Daniel didn't. The next shareholders meeting was scheduled for next Thursday, and this time, I wouldn't be attending as an employee. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the leather folder Margaret had given me resting on the coffee table. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the reality of it still sinking in. 62% of the company. I thought about my father, about the years he'd poured into building a business that valued its people, and about how quickly that culture had eroded under corporate arrogance. Daniel Cross had just made the mistake of underestimating me in front of the entire office. And I was going to make sure that the day I walked back into that boardroom, it wouldn't be to ask for my job back. It would be to take his. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even made coffee. 2 missed calls from HR, 1 email marked urgent in all caps. Exit interview, mandatory attendance 10:30 a.m. I smiled to myself and slid the phone back onto the counter. Let them stew. They'd get nothing from me. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The leather folder Margaret had given me sat beside it, the weight of it more than physical. Inside was the power Daniel didn't know existed, the 62% voting stake that made me untouchable once I decided to act. I opened my email and typed a short message to Margaret. We move next Thursday. Prepare the formal notice to the board. I'll sign in person. Her reply came within minutes. Understood. I'll have everything ready. Expect pushback once the notice is served. Pushback was exactly what I wanted. I didn't step foot in the office for the rest of the week. Instead, I spent those days in quiet preparation. Not the Hollywood kind, no dramatic stakeouts or last-minute miracles, but the slow, methodical gathering of ammunition. My first meeting was with Oliver Grant, an old friend from my operations days who now worked in logistics. We met in a tiny cafe 3 blocks from the office, away from curious eyes. He arrived wearing the same worried look I'd seen on several former colleagues' faces since the firing. "What the hell happened?" he asked as soon as he sat down. "Daniel's been strutting around like he just won a war." "He thinks he did," I said evenly. "I'm letting him enjoy the parade before the rain starts." Oliver leaned in, lowering his voice. "Lizzie, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I said with a small smile. "But I need information, honest numbers, the ones Daniel isn't showing the board." His expression shifted from concern to understanding. "You mean the real turnover figures? The cost overruns? The missed deadlines?" "All of it," I said. "And any proof that his projections are smoke and mirrors." Oliver hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Give me a couple of days." My next call was to a woman named Teresa Alvarez, a former HR manager who had resigned 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances. "I'm surprised to hear from you," she said when we met at a quiet wine bar that evening. "I heard Daniel canned you." "He did," I said. "And in the process, he gave me the one thing I needed, a reason to use what I've been holding on to." Her brow furrowed. "And that is control," I said simply. "And I want to rebuild the company the way it used to be. But first, I need the truth about how many complaints HR buried under Martin's and now Daniel's leadership." Teresa sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "You'll find plenty. I left because they wouldn't let me investigate 2 harassment cases, both swept under the rug. If you're serious, I can get you the files. I kept copies, for my own protection." "I'm serious," I said. By Friday, I had more than I expected. A spreadsheet from Oliver showing that voluntary turnover had spiked 43% in Daniel's first quarter. Internal memos from Teresa proving multiple HR complaints were closed without proper review. Email chains between Daniel and the CFO discussing creative accounting for quarterly reports. None of it was sensational tabloid material. It was worse. Boring, undeniable, corporate malpractice. The kind the board couldn't ignore without exposing themselves. That weekend, I didn't celebrate or gloat. I worked. I went through the documents page by page, organizing them into a binder with neat tabs. Finance, HR, operations, projections versus reality. Every number, every complaint, every email was backed by a source. No embellishments, no easy denials. Margaret called late Sunday evening. "I've prepared the notice," she said. "Once you sign, it will be sent by courier to each board member. The agenda is clear. Special meeting to review and appoint executive leadership." "Good," I said. "Send it first thing Monday." "You know they'll call you the moment they get it," she said. "I'm counting on it." Monday morning, my phone lit up before 9 a.m. with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text from an old board contact. "Lizzie, what is this? Is this a joke?" I didn't reply. The silence was part of the plan. The less they knew before Thursday, the more off-balance they'd be when I walked into that room. That night, as I sat on my couch with the binder open in front of me, I thought about the first time I'd stepped into that building as a young analyst, clutching a fresh degree and a head full of ideas. Back then, the company had been different. My father used to say, "A company is just people with a purpose." Somewhere along the way, that purpose had been replaced by ego. Daniel Cross had no idea that when he'd called me a waste of payroll in front of the entire floor, he'd also handed me the perfect opening line for Thursday's meeting, because I planned to repeat it, word for word, and then show them exactly what payroll waste really looked like. By Tuesday morning, the storm was beginning to gather. The board still didn't have the full picture, but the notice Margaret sent had done its job. Panic was starting to ripple behind closed doors. I knew because my phone had lit up half a dozen times before breakfast with calls from numbers I recognized. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went to meet with Caroline Webb, a woman whose reputation in the corporate world was something between a scalpel and a hurricane. She was a governance consultant, the kind boards called when they needed problems handled quietly. I had hired her 2 years ago for a side project, and we'd stayed in touch. Caroline arrived at the hotel lounge where we agreed to meet, her dark hair pulled back, her leather briefcase looking heavy enough to double as a weapon. "Lizzie," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Margaret gave me the broad strokes. I need details." I handed her the binder. "Everything in here is verified. Turnover data, buried HR complaints, financial misstatements. I'm not interested in smearing Daniel. I want a factual case strong enough to stand on its own." She flipped through a few pages, her brows lifting slightly. "You've got more than enough. This isn't just bad leadership. It's fiduciary negligence. If the board ignores this, they're exposing themselves legally." "That's the point," I said. "They can't just wave it away." Caroline closed the binder and looked me dead in the eye. "Thursday is going to be ugly. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready since the day he fired me." After Caroline left, I sat for a moment with my coffee, thinking about the version of myself who had walked into that conference room last week and been dismissed like an inconvenience. That version of me had smiled politely and walked away. This version was coming back with the majority of the company in her pocket. By Wednesday afternoon, the whispers had grown louder. An old colleague, Maya, texted me, "Daniel's on edge. He canceled 2 meetings today and shut himself in his office. What's going on?" I typed and deleted my reply 3 times before settling on, "Just tell him Thursday will be interesting." That night, I met Oliver in the same cafe as before. He slid a USB drive across the table. "That's the raw server log for Q2 reports," he said quietly. "You'll see what we actually made compared to the fantasy numbers Daniel's been feeding the board." I didn't have to look yet to know it would be damning. I'd already seen enough in the partial data to know revenue had been flat, if not declining. "Oliver," I said, "why are you helping me? This could blow back on you." He shrugged, but his eyes were hard. "Because this used to be a place worth working for. If you can bring that back, it's worth the risk. Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking nothing bad could happen. I dressed deliberately. Navy suit, white blouse, no jewelry except for my watch. Professional, unshakable, neutral. A mirror image of the woman Daniel thought he had erased from the company. Margaret met me in the lobby of the building. "They're all here," she said in a low voice, "and they've been talking to each other since 8 a.m. "Good," I replied. "Let them talk. It'll make what's coming harder to swallow." As we stepped into the elevator, I could feel the shift in my own breathing. Calm, measured, almost like standing backstage before a performance. When we entered the boardroom, the conversation cut off instantly. The long oak table gleamed under the recessed lighting, and every leather chair was filled. Daniel sat at the far end, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. "Well," he said, his tone almost mocking. "This is unexpected." I placed my folder on the table and sat at the head seat without asking. The air shifted. "This meeting," I began, "was called under the authority of the majority shareholder." Several board members exchanged quick glances. One of them, Mr. Redmond, cleared his throat. "Majority shareholder? Lizzie, what are you talking about?" I slid the ownership documents forward. 2 days before my termination, I finalized the purchase of 62% of this company's voting shares. It is a private transfer, legally binding, and filed in accordance with corporate governance. A hush settled over the room. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "And I called this meeting for one reason, to review the current executive leadership." The rest of the meeting was scheduled to be procedural, but I knew the real showdown would come after I presented the evidence. That was when the facade Daniel had been wearing since the moment I walked in would crack. For now, I kept my voice steady, my words simple, and my cards close. I wanted him to feel the walls inching in without seeing the hammer until it dropped. And when it did, I wanted it to be so undeniable that even his allies on the board wouldn't be able to save him. As I left the building that afternoon, I passed Daniel in the lobby. His expression was tight, but there was a flicker of something else there now. Uncertainty. He still thought he had time to get ahead of me. He didn't realize Thursday was just the beginning. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I sat at the head of the table, the ownership documents spread neatly before me, and let the pause stretch just long enough to make every eye in the room stay on me. "As majority shareholder," I began, "I'm exercising my right to call for a formal review of the current executive leadership. That includes the position of CEO." Daniel gave a short, derisive laugh. "This is absurd. You're making a spectacle of yourself, Lizzie. You've been gone a week and you think you understand what's needed at this level?" I met his gaze evenly. "I understand more than you think, and I have data to back it up." I opened the binder I'd brought, the one I'd spent nights assembling with Oliver's and Teresa's help, and slid the first packet across to the board secretary. These are the actual Q2 revenue numbers pulled directly from our internal server logs. They don't match the figures presented in the last board report. The secretary glanced at the first page, then looked sharply at Daniel. "They're taken out of context," Daniel said quickly. "Normal accounting variances." 47% variance? I asked, my voice still calm. "If that's normal, then this company is in worse shape than I thought." Mr. Redmond, one of the senior board members, cleared his throat. "Daniel, that's a significant gap." "It's a timing issue," Daniel insisted. I didn't argue. Instead, I passed out the second set of documents, HR complaint summaries. "This," I said, "is a list of formal employee complaints filed in the last 9 months, none of which were investigated according to policy. Several involve serious allegations that were closed without resolution." One of the newer board members, Ms. Carter, frowned as she flipped through the pages. These are serious. Why weren't we made aware? Because, I said, turning my attention back to Daniel, the complaints were buried. You signed off on at least 2 of them personally. That's not... Your signature is on the closure forms, I interrupted, keeping my tone even. Page 12. There was a rustle of paper as board members flipped to the page. Daniel shifted in his seat, the confident smirk gone now, replaced by the first signs of strain. I let the weight of the documents hang in the air for a beat before moving to the final tab in my binder. Projections versus reality. These, I said, distributing the last packet, are side-by-side comparisons of Daniel's public growth projections versus actual performance under his leadership. Revenue is flat. Market share has dropped 2 points in the last quarter alone. Employee turnover in key departments is up 43%, and yet executive bonuses increased by 15%. For a moment, the only sound was the turning of pages. When Mr. Redmond finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. Daniel, this is troubling. Daniel's hands tightened on the table. She's twisting numbers to make her personal vendetta look legitimate. None of this is actionable. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but carrying. This isn't personal, Daniel. This is governance, and the board's duty is to act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. I happen to be the majority shareholder, which means this motion doesn't need a second vote to pass. The words seemed to land like a physical blow. A few board members exchanged looks, some leaned back, their decision already made. I picked up the final sheet of paper in front of me. The formal motion to remove Daniel Cross as CEO effective immediately. As majority shareholder, I cast my vote in favor. I said, 62%. Motion carries. For a moment, no one moved. Then the board secretary cleared his throat. In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands. Daniel, your termination is effective upon this notice. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a joke, he said, his voice rising. You won't survive a month without me. The company will fall apart. I closed the binder calmly. It's been falling apart with you. Security didn't have to be called. He gathered his things in jerky movements, avoiding everyone's eyes. As he reached the door, he turned back to me. You have no idea what you're doing. I met his gaze one last time. I know exactly what I'm doing. The door shut behind him with a soft click. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer before Ms. Carter broke the silence. Well, that was unexpected. Mr. Redmond looked at me over his glasses. Lizzie, I'll be honest. I didn't know you had this kind of leverage. But if even half of this data is accurate, the board had no choice. It's accurate, I said simply. The meeting moved on to procedural matters, appointing an interim CEO, reviewing immediate operational priorities. But I barely registered the details. My focus was on the shift I could feel in the room. When I'd walked in, I was the outsider, the ex-employee making a scene. When I walked out, I was the person holding the future of the company in my hands. And that was only the beginning. The door clicked shut behind Daniel, and for a long second the room felt too big and too quiet. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even move. I just let my shoulders drop a fraction, the way you do when the thing you've been bracing for finally happens and your body hasn't caught up yet. We still need to run the company, Mr. Redmond said at last, practical as ever. Interim leadership. I'll take responsibility for the transition, I replied. But I don't want a coronation. We do this properly. Margaret nodded once beside me, reading my mind. I'll circulate a resolution naming an interim CEO and an independent operating committee for 90 days. You'll chair the committee, Lizzie. Fine, I said. But the interim CEO should be someone who knows the business and doesn't want the job long term. We landed on Richard Huang, our head of engineering, a soft-spoken builder with zero appetite for politics. He agreed on the spot, on the condition that the role be strictly temporary and that we put a real plan in place for the next quarter. It was exactly the kind of condition I wanted to hear. By the time we walked out of the boardroom, it was early afternoon. The lobby felt different. Quieter, but somehow cleaner. I didn't go to the corner office. I asked facilities to open the main hall instead. Town hall in 30, I told the receptionist. Invite everyone. Floor staff, interns, custodial, contract workers, nobody off the list. I took a breath in the empty hall and listened to the hum of the vents. My father used to test the acoustics here by clapping once and counting the half-echo. I did the same, quietly, and the sound came back small and clear. Good. No theatrics. Just sound carrying without strain. When people started filing in, they did it cautiously, like they weren't sure if this was mandatory or a trap. I stepped to the front with no microphone and no slides, just a stack of papers under my arm and a glass of water. Some of you know me, I began. Some of you saw me escorted out last week. Both things are true. A ripple of nervous laughter broke, quick and human. I'm not here to make a speech, I said. I'm here to be accountable, and to ask for yours. Today, the board removed the CEO. Effective immediately, we have an interim leadership structure for 90 days. During that time, bonuses for senior executives are suspended. We're hiring an independent firm to audit the last 3 quarters and to review every HR complaint closed in the last year. We'll publish the outcomes internally. No names, but real actions. Heads lifted. Not celebration. Attention. If you filed a complaint and felt ignored, I continued, we will contact you. If you left because you were dismissed or overlooked, expect a call if we need you back. It won't fix everything overnight, but we start today. I didn't give them a slogan. I gave them a phone number. A reinstated ethics line routed to the external auditor, not to HR. A QR code on the screens for anonymous input. A simple email. rebuild@company.com, monitored by me and 2 outside counsel with whistleblower protection experience. It wasn't flashy. It was infrastructure. At the end, I said the line I had promised myself I would say only if I'd earned it. Last week, I was called a waste of payroll. I want you to know what payroll is to me. Names, not numbers. If we can't say your name and what you do well, we don't deserve your work. There was no applause at first. Then there was. Not loud, not performative. Just enough to tell me people had registered the difference between a show and a plan. The next days were unglamorous. We canceled a ridiculous executive offsite that had been booked at a mountain resort. That money paid for back pay owed to the warehouse team for overtime miscalculated under a pilot scheduling program. We shut down 2 vanity projects in marketing and redeployed their budgets to hiring 3 desperately needed support engineers. When the audit firm asked for access, we gave them everything. Every server, every folder, every inbox under legal hold. I told them on the record, if you find something that makes me look bad, include it. Oliver came by my desk. Just a normal workstation on the 3rd floor I had borrowed while the interim structure held. He looked at the monitor, then at me. You're really doing it, he said. Not a question. Slowly, I said. The only revenge that lasts is the kind that improves things. He grinned at that. You're going to put that on a mug? No, I said. I'm going to put it in payroll. On Tuesday of the following week, an email went out. HR was reopening cases. Teresa, who had left rather than be complicit, agreed to return as an external advisor to rebuild the function with clear standards and timelines. She asked for one non-negotiable, final say on whether cases could be closed without action. I gave it to her, with board oversight. Investors wanted a call. I scheduled it for Friday. No spin. We're restating Q2, I told them plainly. Not because we failed, but because we refuse to lie. Our path forward is boring, Better retention, better products, realistic targets. There was a beat of silence, then a few tough questions. And then, unexpectedly, 2 funds asked about increasing their positions if we hit the new lower guidance. Reality, it turns out, is investable. The day the audit report came back, I read it in a conference room with the blinds half drawn. It was worse in places than I'd hoped and better in others than I'd feared. We published the summary to staff with the actions already attached. Reimbursements for misallocated travel, clawbacks where permissible, training where necessary, termination where justified. Names kept private, remedies public. I walked the floors more in those weeks than I had in the last year. I learned the names of the night cleaning crew. I sat with the support team on a Saturday morning and listened to the scripts they'd been forced to use, the ones that had them apologizing for defects they didn't cause. We wrote a new script together. Shorter, honest, backed by a promise engineering signed. One evening, passing the whiteboard by engineering, I noticed new handwriting. Someone had written, "We stopped whispering." Underneath, someone else had added, "We started fixing." I stood there longer than I meant to. It was not profound poetry. It was better. Measurable culture. On the 90th day, we gathered the board again. Richard gave back the interim badge with relief and a joke about getting to sleep again. We voted. Formally this time. I accepted the role of CEO because the work needed a spine, and I could offer mine. Then I did something I'd promised myself in the quiet. I asked for a performance review after 6 months conducted by the same outside firm doing the audit. Audit, with the results shared internally. Power is safest when it expects to be measured. I called another town hall. This time the seats filled faster. I wore the same navy suit from the day Daniel tried to humiliate me, not for symbolism, but because it reminded me that clothes are just fabric. It's the choices that make them mean anything. I won't pretend the last months were easy, I said. They weren't. Some of you lost managers you liked. Some of you had to relive things you'd rather forget. Thank you for telling the truth anyway. I paused, thinking of my father, of the ribbon he'd cut on that first warehouse, of the calluses on his hands that never quite went away even after he became executive. He used to say a company is just people with a purpose. I finally understood the sentence he didn't say out loud. The purpose is to make people better, not smaller. If there's a message in all of this, I said, it's simple. Leadership isn't volume and revenge isn't ruin. Leadership is accountability, and revenge, if you insist on calling it that, is the choice to rebuild what someone else tried to break. Afterward, Maya from Ops found me in the aisle. Do you think Daniel knows? She asked softly. How this turned out? I don't know, I said. And I don't need to. That night, alone in the office, I finally went up to the corner room. I didn't change the desk or the windows. I did replace the photographs on the wall with images from the shop floor and the help desk and the warehouse. On the credenza, I set one frame. My father and me at that first ribbon cutting, both of us squinting into the sun, proud for reasons I could not have named then. I opened the latest report. Revenue was up, modestly, honestly. Customer satisfaction had climbed. Turnover had slowed. None of it was meteoric. All of it was real. There was a soft knock. Come in, I said. Teresa stood in the doorway holding a slim folder. Final update, she said. We've cleared the backlog. People are starting to trust the process again. Thank you, I said, meaning it. She hesitated. You okay? I looked around the room, at the city, at the work. I am, I said. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. We're okay. When she left, I closed my laptop and let the quiet expand. The revenge everyone wanted to see, the dramatic kind, the kind with fireworks, had already happened the day the door clicked behind Daniel. What mattered afterward was the choice I made next. I chose to build.
nicht sieht, ob man wirklich was gemacht hat. Außer, dass man ständig die Fäden abschneidet.